And welcome to our open faith discussion at Talk of Christ, Faith, Family, and Adventure. Today we are going to discuss The Truman Show, the Jim Carrey movie from, anybody know the year? Anyway, Dave, I'm going to turn the 1998. There we go. I'll turn the time over to you, Dave, to discuss your take and lead us into that discussion.
Okay, so the introduction to the conversation is basically, in a nutshell, this. The Truman Show, it seems to me, at its most obvious understanding, at least insofar as it intersects with religion, is probably most easily interpreted as a fairly anti-religious movie. That is, at least a movie that is vilifying any organization, particularly of religion, and I'll say why particularly in just a minute, but any organization which seeks to control the individual and to otherwise exploit the individual by taking away their individuality, their power of choice, their control, etc. And the reason why I say it's anti-religious instead of simply anti-organizational is because of all the religious symbolism throughout. Most on the nose is the creator, who's named Christoph, right? Like Christ, who created a world, he says in the end, when he's talking to Truman, who's trying to escape. And he says, who are you through the sky? And it says, I am the creator. And he pauses for a second. And then it says, of a television show in which you're the star, right? And the thing is that Christoph in this movie, I think we are led to believe, genuinely believes he's doing what's best for Truman. He's created this world where Truman is safe, etc. And Truman says, was anything real? And he says, you were real. And he says, but don't get the wrong idea. If you leave this world, nothing's more real outside this world, right? And he says, why don't you stay here? He wants him to stay, where, of course, Truman feels he cannot stay. It's a lie at that point. And so we were talking a bit offline, and Corey's going to fill this out a little bit more, but this is, I think, how many people feel when leaving a religion. And I can only speak to my own experience of having many friends who have left the LDS church, how they've described their feelings of leaving the LDS church, that it is throughout the Truman Show movie, he kind of goes about the realization that something's wrong. That's phase one. And phase two is that this is all a sham and his foundations are crumbling, and he tests it, but everybody seems to be in on it. It's only driving him further. This gaslighting is driving him further into madness. And then eventually he escapes, right? And in order to do this, everybody is against him in his escape. And they all combine to go look for him. They're arm in arm walking down the street, searching for him to bring him back into this, what we as the audience know in dramatic irony is this hoax, right? But he has very courageously, he's the hero shot, as it says at the one point during the storm. He's our hero. He's very courageously faced his fear, his mortal fear of water, to go out onto the ocean to escape. And he doesn't know where it'll go. It's completely open-ended. And then Christoph uses the very forces of nature to stop his escape. And he capsizes the boat. He almost kills Truman in his escape. But Truman is courageous. He perseveres. And in the end, he slams into the limit, the very limit. There's a lot of metaphor going on here. The end of the hoax. He can go no further. And at that point, Christoph reveals himself and says this was a TV show. And so the whole thing is about escaping an oppressive and exploitative, controlling paradigm, and how much courage that takes, how much pain that takes, how everyone will combine against you so that you can't get away. So here's the tension. Why do I, as a religious person and somebody who wants to remain a religious person, find the Truman Show and Truman himself so inspiring, so heroic? Why do I think that Truman is a hero if I myself choose to remain in in the organization or an organization which I think the Truman Show's creators were intending to skewer? Is it just because I don't see the organization that I'm in as being exploitative like the creators of the Truman Show? That's the question. Discuss.
Yeah, I could put like I've seen a few different takes on this, because this is it's a very philosophical minded movie in what it's trying to portray. I've seen, and there are probably aspects you'd have to ignore to get some of these takes, but one of the takes I've heard is also it's a good symbolism for Christianity and for Genesis in a way, because he's leaving paradise and where everything is about him, and he's going into the world of real relationships and a world of real risk. And so it's like, at least from an LDS perspective, it'd be kind of like a pre-existent faux perfection where it's there, but it's not. I mean, I don't know if we don't think it's not real, but couple that with the Garden of Eden, where we have to leave the safety of knowing for sure exactly how our lives are going to turn out, and then we open the door to the unknown and to the real risk of life and mortality, and what exactly that holds for us, we don't know. There's a lot of I can't remember. I don't remember his name, but there's a famous quote from a philosopher where he kind of posits this worldview. He's like, what if at the beginning, like, I'm not doing it verbatim, obviously, but like, what if at the beginning God said, how about I will make a world where there are real risks and real challenges, and I cannot guarantee that everyone is going to come back, but we all have to rely on one another in order to get there. And I can't guarantee that this is actually going to succeed in that everyone will come back and get the benefit from it that they could, but it may be worth it in the end. Are you with me? Are you with each other? Do we all promise to do this? And so that's kind of, obviously LDS people recognize their own story within that type of quote. And I'm probably embellishing even more to make it seem more like that. Anyway, another view is accepting, it's kind of the same thing, but it's accepting Christ in that you leave the self-centered world. You leave the world of things and the world of where everything revolves around you. And you say, again, it's kind of the same thing, but you open the door, and that's like when you enter in at the gate or something to your new life, the death of the old self, and you enter into the new self. So I've seen that. And lastly, and I gave this another quote a while ago, but it's philosophical it's a symbol for, who says it? I think is it Aristotle or Plato who has the cave?
Yeah, that's Plato.
Plato's cave. Anyway, so yeah, like Plato has this cave metaphor about what philosophy is about, where it's like, we're looking at this wall of a cave, and that's what, we have this distorted view of reality when you don't venture into the unknown, and we see maybe there's a fire behind us or like some light, and we see some shadows on the cave of things, and we're trying to guess at what it is and what it means, but we can't know, and it's all just a shadow until we leave the cave itself, and then we enter the unknown world of philosophy, or just questioning reality. And I gave that quote, I think, when we talked about epistemology, again along the same lines of and this is where I get my inspiration from. Like, it's actually an inspiring movie. Maybe this is kind of where you get it. It's empowering because it says, at least in growing up religious in general, and probably LDS, like, you are kind of given this child straightforward version of life and things, and that's, probably everyone as a child gets a very simplistic version of history, of black and white the world is. But as you grow up and your worldview becomes expanded and enlightened, and you realize everything is more complicated than I understood as a child. Like, the founding of my country, a lot more complicated than I originally understood. My parents and their ability to do anything, a lot more complicated than I understood. My religion, its history, a lot more complicated than I understood. But the Truman Show gives me this feeling of, yes, we can leave that simplistic view behind and go into that unknown world where things are, yes, less certain, but that's where the real adventure begins. And anyway, sorry, that was a long talking, but I will not talk a lot more.
No, that was good.
I think that religious people will also see the entire movie, The Truman Show, in a light of, look, there is something wrong with the world that we live in, and we're trying to figure out what that is. From in the context of Christianity, that is sin, and just we've all had that kind of an experience of trying to just figure out the world, and are we the only actors in this play and everybody else is just a part of our consciousness, or are we are they here for us? This is not a religious thing. This is just a general philosophical what if type thing. But when we try to focus on our religion is supposed to give us some kind of sense of the purpose of life and the purpose of the world as it's been created. And so I guess it can be fun, at least for Latter-day Saints, to watch the video and to ask yourself those kinds of questions about why the world is the way it is and what's wrong with the world, and can I escape, and those who haven't yet figured out what's wrong, can they move forward into a belief in Christ? I guess the point is that I'm getting at is that while, Dave, you make a very good point that the movie seems to be anti-religion, and that that religion is created to kind of keep us trapped in, I think some religious types could see it exactly the opposite way, that those who have not yet come to faith or belief and have not yet realized the reasons for which the world is created, and have not yet figured out sin and Jesus and those kinds of things, that they need to figure that out in order to live life. And that whether you're inside the bubble or outside the bubble, as you've already pointed out, the world isn't
escaping a paradigm.
Yeah,
either way, it's escaping a paradigm, and it's about the painful experience and the opposition you encounter when trying to escape an oppressive paradigm. And what you're saying is, well, maybe the oppressive paradigm is not having God in your life. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, at least that may be. I mean, just to answer your question, why do so many religious people seem to like the video when it seems to have an anti-religious message, is I think that it can be interpreted by them as, actually, I've got it figured out. I know that it is all.
There's only two problems with that, I think. And one is that that they named the villain Christoph. So they wanted the villain,
they named Truman True Man.
Yes, True Man. Right. Thank you. They named the villain Christoph, and he's a villain who cares about Truman. It shows the scene where he's kind of petting Truman's face on the screen. There's nothing contrived about that. He cares about, but so religion I think the message here is that religion may or may not be nefarious in its exploitation, but it still is keeping people in paradigms that benefit it right now. So that's one problem, is that the movie makers, it seems to me, didn't see it the way that you've described, Stephen. But who cares? The movie makers can see it however they want, and we can take whatever message we want. It's kind of like that the joke on Twitter where Uno says, the Uno card makers say, you can't put a +2 on a +2. And then somebody says, thanks for the cards, Uno. We'll take it from here. And that's, same thing here. I don't care really what the movie makers intended us to think. We'll take it from here, right? So let's put the Christoph one aside. The second problem, though, is that if you say, living without God in the world or in your life or in your worldview or your paradigm, that is not a situation that we would typically associate with being told what to think, where living with a theology is. If you live with a theology, you only know God in the first instance from what you've been told about God. Now you can, if you've never been told about God, let's say you're on a deserted island and you're born there with nobody around. Could you find God? Yes, perhaps. I believe you could. You could find God in nature and in your own communion, right? But in a society, in the first instance, you meet God through what you're told, right? And so God is a paradigm that you're given. Your theology is a paradigm that you're given. You may go throughout your life tweaking that, paradigm with your own experience and putting your own gloss on it. But in the first instance, your theology is a paradigm that you're given. And so that is more like, what's the place called in the Truman Show? Seacrest or something? Heaven Crest? Haven? I don't know. Actually, that's interesting. I'm sure that it is something having to do with heaven. I think there's a haven in there somewhere. But
could be Sea Haven.
Sea Haven. Okay. So that's why I think now you could argue back, and I expect that you would, that living without God in your life is, as Christoph says in the end, there's no more truth out there than there is in here. It's all paradigms that you're given. No matter, if you are born in an atheist household and taught that there is no God, or taught to make up your own mind about God, you're still going to be taking in that worldview and being told what to think, in a sense. So
we've had a discussion before on that, whether it was on these videos or not. I think it was about how everybody's got to pick some kind of a story that they're living with. And the question is simply, how much of that story are they going to be taking from other people? How closely will they follow someone else's paradigm and instructions? And how much are they just going to make up on their own, or,
Right.
So.
And to piggyback on Corey's comment, this is what earlier, either it was in the back channel or on a text thread or in one of our videos, but Eric had said that he felt that his decision to leave the church felt to him like coming out of the cave. And the retort, I think, that Stephen gave was, but you just walked into another cave, and I'm saying it in words differently than were used, because it wasn't meant to be disrespectful to anybody, either person's observation. But essentially the observation that even every time you leave a paradigm, you can only step into another paradigm. There's no such thing as truly free thought. And that gets us back to freedom and determinism, right?
You've taken us all the way around.
Yeah, it's a
but you had no other choice. You had no other choice to do so. So, I've thought about this, like what Corey was saying, this Plato's, allegory of the cave, right? And leaving. And I like the point that you bring up, Dave, of, that when you leave a paradigm, of course, there's only one other paradigm, that you can only adapt or adopt another paradigm. For me, I grew up in a family that was not religious at all. And it was more of that option of, kind of figure out your own thing. But when I chose to, follow the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its doctrines and its teaching, and that's what I chose, then it was an issue. And then it was, no, you can't choose that.
You can choose how to think unless it's this way, then you can't choose that.
Right.
Interesting.
And it is interesting. And I think, when I think of the Truman Show, I think of it in the sense of this freedom of thought, the ability to think critically, to think on your own without being told what is or what should be, that you can come up to your own conclusions. And I think that's part of the story and part of the film, is that, everything is kind of given in a certain way. And, Truman, as we've mentioned, right, he's the only one that doesn't know that everybody else is in on this.
Yeah, sure. And of course, as Stephen said, solipsism is a huge theme in the Truman Show. It's the major theme. And it's not one that really fits with the religious discussion, because I don't think that there's a religious paradigm that really leans into solipsism. But
Well,
in fact,
the closest thing, certainly not with a full religion backing it or anything, but there is that egg allegory, right?
I love that. Yeah, that's
yeah.
worth talking about sometime. But I think that there
We
is
might-
the
we
one
might
scene in
mention
the
it
Truman Show.
real quick here, just the idea, just in short, that every single person. I mean, you look it up on who does it again? Who's the one that is the author of the egg allegory? Andy Weir.
Neil Gaiman.
Andy Weir. But and simply that he that every single being that ever lived or existed we're all the same. One being living life after life after life, and so
it's Andy Weir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to the Egg by Andy Weir, Weir. Go read it. It's worth reading. It's interesting. Anyway, what I was going to say is there is the one scene in the Truman Show where everybody is arm in arm looking for Truman. And I feel like that's in the church. When somebody's leaving the church, you get kind of these, rescue missions a lot of the time, and home teachers get involved and people start baking cookies. And that's all good to a certain extent, except that to the extent that it seems to still be oppressive to that person of you're trying to keep me in, just let me decide, but the reason why that's interesting here is because if there is a religion that leans into the solipsism angle, it's worth considering that in the Truman Show, the extras and the supporting characters, they cannot be saved without Truman. See, that's why it's so important to them that Truman come back. They wouldn't do that if anybody had disappeared.
And in addition, in the Truman Show, all of the supporting characters know what's going on, and that's just not the case in religion because we're all Truman.
Right.
It's not like
So, but anyway, I was just going to say that if there is a religion that believes that salvation is not individual, it might be the LDS religion. But I was going to come back to another point. What was it? Oh, it was let's abstract this theme another 10,000 feet. So the way I had described it was kind of anti-religious. What if we say instead, look, the hero is free thinking. It's not Truman. It's not a person. The hero is free thinking. The villain is oppressive paradigms. That's it. Doesn't matter whether they're religious or any other kind of oppressive paradigm. The hero is free thinking, and it is difficult for free thinking to escape oppressive paradigms. And in fact, it's frowned upon. It's told that it would be dangerous to escape, like in The Village, another great movie with huge, obvious religious overtones about escaping oppressive paradigms. So the question is that I asked at first of how can religious people find the Truman Show inspiring is they don't view their paradigm as oppressive. They view it, in fact, as free thinking. If that's the case, then you don't feel oppressed watching, or you don't feel like you're rooting for the villain or anything like that when you're watching the Truman Show, because you feel like, yeah, that's us. Truman is us. It's LDS people trying to escape the world and its oppressive paradigms or whatever. Now, again, I don't think that's what the movie makers intended. And I think it's a bit of a stretch, but I do think that people everywhere, whether they're religious or non-religious, whether they are even in a cult, could view themselves and do choose to view themselves as free thinkers. And they choose to view the paradigms that they've chosen as freely chosen paradigms. So that's an interesting concept. Joey's getting in it.
Some people watching this video will find a lot of irony in what you just said.
Well, no doubt. And I want to say for those people, and maybe including you, Joey, that I get it, at least insofar as I get that I'm in a paradigm that's telling me how to think about certain things. And I get that that can be oppressive to some people. Why do I think it's not oppressive to me? Couple reasons, which I'll think of as I'm saying them. First of all, I think that there's a people talk about LDS and Mormonism and all kinds of churches, but let's stay with LDS being a big tent now. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think that the tent is as big as your mind, right? So it's a big tent for some people, and for some people it's not, depending on how narrow-minded they are. For me, I flatter myself by saying I think that the LDS religion is a big tent. How do I know? Because I think it can accommodate me. And I don't think that I am, in all respects, at least in how I view the world, so closely aligned with, say, for example, just to have a true north here, the current general or local leadership on any given issue. I may articulate my worldviews on those issues differently than they do. And yet I think that I still fit. Okay, so that's why I think big tent matters in terms of not being an oppressive. The closer there's a demand for orthodoxy, or the stronger the demand for orthodoxy, the stronger the demand for you must accept this tenet or you are out, the more it starts to feel like I'm getting, told exactly what to think. Now, there are, as we've talked about before, there are a few tenets in any religion, and certainly in LDS, theology as well, that are non-negotiable. We haven't really defined what those are, those first tier tenets. We've talked around them a little bit, and we've talked about the temple recommend interview, or even more broadly, the baptismal interview, and whether those are things that you have to accept pretty much as written to be an LDS person. I don't know if we've come to a solid answer on that, but Joey, I understand that my comment may seem ironic regarding how most people view most Mormons. Again, I flatter myself by saying I don't think it's really descriptive of me.
And I said some people watching this video will find irony in what you said, but I don't.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm not one to bandy about the word cult when talking about the LDS Church. Are you
on a submarine? What is that? Do you guys hear that beeping?
Yeah, there's a missile. There's an incoming missile. I am actually in Steve's backyard. I was trapped inside of his house, and he told me that he didn't want me to leave, and I just opened the back door and I walked out. I just left.
I created this house for you, Joey.
Much like in the Truman Show. Truman Show.
It was. I asked you to wear a red shirt, just like me. I created this house for you, and I just thought. But
he
you will wear a red shirt like me.
He stroked my face, gently, and
so you stepped out.
No, I think if Mormonism was at one time a cult, maybe it was, but I think it's reinvented itself in the last 50 years. There's a huge academia within Mormonism nowadays. Like it's.
Yeah.
I'd never, some people call it a cult. I'd never call it a cult. It's just some people, some people, sometimes they say that it's a cult, but I've never called it a cult.
I think any religion could technically be called a cult. It's pejorative.
Sure. No. And what I'm about to say is going to make my religion sound more like a cult than yours. So
good luck.
Go for it.
So I may be the one who's seen the Truman Show most recently. I watched it a couple months ago with my son. We've been showing our kids a lot of older movies that we enjoyed, and so that was one that came up, and we were like, oh, let's watch this today. And you know what's funny? I did not see any religious overtones in the movie when I watched it.
Really?
And the last time I would have seen it would have been before I left the church. So, and I don't know that I saw a whole lot of religious overtones in it back, the first time, couple of times I saw it.
So do you think it's kind of a Rorschach test or something?
I don't know. Maybe. No, I'm seeing them now that we're having this conversation, and I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. And honestly, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, like in the time shortly after I left the church, every movie had religious themes in it for me.
Sure, every song's a breakup song.
Yeah. And but then there was something happened, some switch flipped in my head probably about 10 years ago. I just stopped thinking that way, and I just started enjoying movies again as movies, and But here's the difference in the way that I would approach a movie and the way that it sounds like most of you are approaching it. In Mormonism, you talk about finding truth in unlikely places or finding truth everywhere, right? That everyone has some part of the truth. And I would say, like, in my worldview, truth comes from God, it comes from scripture. And I don't look for a whole lot of and we've had this conversation before, right? I think in our back channel, I quoted a scripture that says, like, what accord has Christ with Belial, the false god. And I tend to approach most things that way. And so when I look at a movie like The Truman Show, I can go, oh, yep, that is totally anti-Christian, anti-religious. That's coming from the world. That's the world's view of things, and it's anti-God. Which is funny because, like, I could totally see myself like, oh, that was me when I was trapped in Mormonism, and now I've exited through the back door, But now I look at it and go, that's just as much about what I'm trapped in, the bubble that I'm trapped in, as it is about the bubble that you're trapped in. Like, it's and I said a second ago, and so I'm fulfilling my promise now to make my religion sound even more like a cult than yours. I would not use the word oppressive, but I absolutely believe that the Bible tells us what to believe, right? I mean, we had this conversation last week. Is something right because God says it's right, or does God say it's right because it is right, right?
Yeah.
Like, I very much believe in a God who tells me what to believe, and he's God and I'm not, and so that's what I'm supposed to believe. We talk in Reformed circles about thinking God's thoughts after him. There's no such thing as an original thought that we could have as a human. We're just thinking God's thoughts after him. And so I think that The Truman Show is perhaps a valid criticism of my worldview, that I do believe that God has put us here, and we can choose to live in this world that God created for us, or we can try to break out of it. I don't think we can ultimately break out of it, but so
well, I was gonna comment on that, what you just barely said about I don't think we can break out of it. This is one reason why a religious person watching The Truman Show would have almost no inclination that it's about, or that it could be about, being trapped in religion, because
right.
If you have the mindset and the worldview that there is nothing outside of the universe that God has created, there's nothing to break out of, this is the way it is, then you're already on the outside. And so if you depict, or if you can imagine someone else trapped inside The Truman Show, it's not going to be you.
I could agree with Christoph saying, there's no more truth out there than there is in here. Like, if you leave the world that God has made for you, what's out there but hellfire and damnation, right? There's nothing out there,
And I think that certainly there's a lot of validity to what Christoph says there. I don't think that that's a lie. I think that, breaking out of Sea Haven, you are walking into other forms of deception. And as we've just talked about, leaving the cave, you don't leave and see things as they are immediately. You just see things in a different cave, in a different way. It's just a system of caves, right? And that's, that seems kind of depressing to think about. Is there such thing as walking out of the cave, truly seeing things as they are, not being told how to perceive, how to think, how to interpret? Is there such a thing? Probably.
I think the answer is yes.
Okay, go ahead. Where? How do you find it? What is it?
Well, I think, especially within the LDS Church, revelation is one of those things that I'd say, that I can come up something independently through revelation, that I can have a thought to do something that is not necessarily something that I'm told that I should do.
Isn't that a voice from Christoph?
Okay. I'm sorry. I need to push back a little bit on that, because this is actually one of my pet peeves in the church regarding personal revelation. You're allowed to have let's be real here. You're allowed to have personal revelation so long as it's in accordance with the general revelation of the church. And that's fine. That's fine. But let's not pretend that it's license for originality.
Okay, so, of course, there's going to be confines, right? There's have to be certain things like, if I say, well, I'm the prophet because God came and told me, right? Then that's
what Joseph Smith said. Yes.
Yeah. But there was no Joseph Smith before him and no church before him. So that was a new
there was a Jesus before him, I think most Christians would report.
And there was all of Christianity, and he spoke up and said Christianity's all wrong. The church is wrong.
He had a preacher who said you're out of line, right?
Right.
So it's okay. Look, I'm not trying to get critical. I'm not trying to get that critical of my own religion here, but it seems to be okay for Joseph Smith to have very radical personal revelation, but not really the general membership. Because
I think it
Joseph
depends.
Smith was right, then we don't need it, I guess, is the answer.
Well, I guess my thought was this is, even the Book of Mormon itself, it says, pray for yourself to find out if it's true.
Sure.
You go and figure it out. And so
Yeah,
I guess that's the approach that I'm coming from.
Okay, but
go ahead, push back.
I'm just pushing. Look, I'm a believing member. I just want to make that clear. But I just want to push back on this just a little bit. This is, as I said, this is one of my pet peeves, is that we don't acknowledge, as church members, we don't acknowledge the circularity of our reasoning here. And I think we just should. We should just own it, right? You say, Joe, that we're told to pray for our own answers and our own revelation, but you know as well as I do that the party line is, but if you get the wrong answer, then either you didn't pray hard enough, you're not living worthily, you just, there is a wrong answer and you got it wrong for whatever reason. And
well, the example is
if you get the right answer, then that was personal revelation. But if you get the wrong answer, if you get a no, that wasn't personal revelation.
Could we accept or countenance if your friend or your family member comes to you and says, I did pray and God actually told me, I had a feeling, I know the Book of Mormon is not true and that President Nelson is not a prophet, he's a fraud, and Joseph Smith is a fraud. I feel that, I know that from God. The question is, did you get revelation?
Right.
Are you allowed to get that revelation?
Say no. That God didn't reveal that to you. I think the church would say, I cannot speak for the church, obviously, but most church members that I've known throughout my life would say, that wasn't revelation. You did something wrong, or you're interpreting the feeling wrong. Now, look, I think we can acknowledge that that's circular, that it's weak, and it's okay. Okay. Because the more we try to fight against that, I think the more knots we get tied in. Now, for me as an individual, what it means is that when somebody comes and tells me what Stephen said, that they feel in their hearts that God doesn't want them to do, I accept it. I say, okay. And I don't just say, okay, I mean it. I mean, I believe, look, if I'm entitled to know it's true, you're entitled to know it's false. Those answers are inconsistent, but why should I prize my own ability to receive revelation over yours? I'm done.
Joe, go. Do you have more? Joey there? Go ahead and take us home on this Truman Show.
I'll let Joe talk because he didn't get a much of a chance to talk, but I got like one more thing I want to say.
All I was going to say is, what David just said. It's like, well, that's exactly where I'm coming from too, is that if somebody, I was not raised in the faith. I was not raised LDS. So I was not raised with that paradigm. This is it. And that's all. And I served a mission. And there are certainly plenty of people where we taught the gospel and we felt like, you felt the Spirit and this is great. And they decided not to do it. And we said, well, okay. See you later.
Yeah,
right?
Of course you said okay, but what I'm saying is, did you also think, well, you're wrong? It's like in the Book of Mormon musical. Oh, that's okay. Have fun in hell, right?
I don't personally think that, but I think, yes, generally the church and members of the church would say yes, but do I personally? No, I don't. Sure. Because again, I have family members that are outside of the church, and I would like to think that God is loving and merciful and that things will be sorted out and that they're not going to be cast out from his presence because they haven't accepted the gospel.
Sure.
And
sure. And I'm not trying to talk about the eternal justice and mercy of God. I just mean in terms of,
do I personally mean it when I say okay? Yeah.
No. Daniel, I mean, like, do you think they're wrong?
So Daniel Woodfield is a perfect example of this, right? He's my best friend. He's the one that brought me to the church. He was scared to tell me that he was leaving the church because he was scared that I wouldn't be his friend anymore. And I said, you're my friend.
Yeah.
When somebody leaves a church, the person doesn't change, their thoughts change. I have another friend who has left the church, and same thing, that I knew them after they had left the church.
What are we but our thoughts? Go ahead.
And same thing, like, we have another relative, Stephen Dave, who for one reason or another left the church and has come back, but I knew them after the fact, and them coming back to the church they were the same to me. The person themselves was the same. And so,
Sure.
yes, if they do, I think they're wrong? No, I don't think they're wrong.
Okay.
I think that, in my mind, I'm thinking, I think they're missing out on some things, but I don't think that equates to the same as you are wrong or this is awful. I'm just like, oh man, you're missing out on a couple of things, but that's fine if that's what you choose.
I love it. I love to hear that. That's a wonderful way of articulating it. I think that's the best way, is to say, well, I think that there's enrichment to be found through this path, but who am I to say your path is right or wrong and mine is right or wrong? I'm doing what I feel is best for me. You're doing what you feel is best for you. I just hate the discussion in terms of right and wrong ways to live and to believe. And I think that the LDS philosophy generally does see a right and a wrong.
Right. Well, because
about God.
we have very specific truth claims. And so, for I think the general membership of the church, when you look at that, it is black and white. And just the same way, like I said, my friend Daniel looked at things black and white. And Joey, I think, has mentioned that, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that he saw things more kind of black and white. I've always been a gray area. I've always looked at things in the middle. I think I've generally been a nuanced person. And I don't know that that's intentionally. I think that's just part of my nature. And I think,
Sure.
I'm open-minded and able to accept different things. So anyways, that's my take. That's where I'm coming from. And Joey can wrap us up.
Yeah. So I would say, I don't think you're putting words in my mouth. I would say that my worldview is pretty black and white. Dave earlier characterized it as the choices between an oppressive paradigm on the one hand or free thinking on the other hand. And when you put it like that, free thinking sounds pretty good. But to me, it's the difference between free thinking, or, like I was saying a minute ago, thinking God's thoughts after him, thinking the truth, right? Mm-hmm. Is it worth it if I go off on my own and develop some new novel idea if that's totally bullcrap? I want to believe the truth. I want to think God's thoughts after him. I don't want to be a free thinker. In my worldview I don't want to do that. I don't want to go off the path, right? So I said a minute ago that when I watched the movie, I didn't even see any of these religious overtones. And I just want to give a shout out to just how great Jim Carrey is. He's hilarious. He doesn't get a chance to be as goofy in this movie as he is in a lot of his other movies. This one is kind of supposed to be his serious, where he kind of came into his own as like a real actor, actor. And I think he nails it. I think he nails the comedy elements in this movie. He nails the more serious elements of it. It's funny to me. I just enjoy the movie as a movie. I didn't really. It's funny. I didn't even really think about the religious overtones, but I've enjoyed this conversation. And I would enjoy more conversations about other movies as well. So that's all I want to say.
Before David speaks, I have to say that I have always thought of David. I've always compared David to Jim Carrey. I don't know why, but when I first met David, Jim Carrey I think you look kind of like him, but a redhead, and your humor. And you're a lawyer, and I loved the movie Liar Liar that Jim Carrey was in. So anyways,
thank you.
Just want to say that.
That's high praise. I think that he is an excellent actor, an excellent comedic and dramatic actor. And I don't even think we need to put actor in quotes when talking about Jim Carrey. I think he's probably proved his chops. But the one thing I was going to say when you were talking, Joey, just now is that we all know the song Come Thou Fount, which has a line in it that says, let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. It's this kind of chosen bondage. Bondage is a word loaded with negative connotation for good reason, but a chosen tying of yourself to someone else, to go back to our analogy in the woods, right? And saying, I'm going to follow this person. What is nefarious in the Truman Show is he never chose to be in Sea Haven. He was given his existence and not told the truth about the nature of his choice. I suppose there's certainly nothing wrong with choosing a paradigm if you are aware of the nature of your choice. There's nothing that is anti-free thinking, I should say, about choosing a paradigm. We all have to choose a cave that we're living in until we're certain that, as the Bible says, right, until we see through a glass darkly now, and then we will see as we're seen and know as we're known. Maybe that's what that means. I don't know. But for now, we are essentially choosing between available paradigms with slight tweaks that I believe may be attributable to some degree of free thought. But the real nefarious thing is never being given a choice in the first place. So maybe what we as fathers can do is make sure that our children are aware of the nature of the choice. I see something a lot on social media now where people post pictures and say, my 8-year-old has decided to be baptized, a member of the Church of Jesus, has chosen to follow Christ, has, they say all these things. And, it's nice. This is my 8-year-old, by the way, who has chosen to follow Christ. But I sometimes wonder when I see it, how much of it is lip service and language, and how much of it is, look, he didn't really have much of a choice. Certainly, even if we told him he had a choice, did he really understand the nature of it? Is 8 too young to have a choice, to choose? Yeah, I know you can hear me. Thanks. Anyway, I think that's the message of the Truman Show. Maybe it's not anti-religious. Maybe it is free thinking versus oppressive, unchosen paradigms. And so long as there's choice, maybe that's why we can see it as an inspirational, if we see choice in our own path, then we can see the Truman Show as inspirational. If we see free choice about our own worldview, that's it. That's my closing statement.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and great discussion. We'll do some more of these movie ones in future discussions at some point.
All right.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Thank you.